You're live.
I am live now? Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Is everyone seeing the full screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. On screen share with the folklore of the originals. Guys, is that what you're seeing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so tonight for Mysticism with Mars, thank you for letting me host again. We're going to talk about the folklore of the originals and the Vampire Diaries. Very complex, the whole mythology of the shows. So I'm not going to go into it completely, but I'm going to cover as much as I can and connect it to existing realistic folklore. So let's begin. For starters, I'm going to be giving you a lot of spoilers tonight, so keep that in mind before seeing either of the shows. The series finale of Vampire Diaries is actually this Friday, and the 4th season of the originals is starting next week. Oh no. It did not. Oh, there we go. Folks, I'm getting technical difficulties right now. Oh. All right, sorry about that, folks. I had a glitch. All right, for starters, what we're looking at tonight, we're going to be covering the mythology in this universe of vampires, witches, and witchcraft in general, werewolves, hybrids, and doppelgangers. All right, a little bit of info on the show is all the mythology itself starts directly on the Vampire Diaries, but it quickly expanded much, much further than that to the show, the originals. What I'm going to be presenting tonight is going to be primarily out of order as how it was presented in the shows. A lot of the past facts are actually revealed through flashbacks directly on the show. The premise of the originals in general is the family returns to New Orleans to reclaim their kingdom, specifically their territory. Since the history is so vast in general on the show, they actually have a pretty big collection of enemies that are keeping them from their primary goal, and civil warfare, as well as a lot of politics involved. And on both shows involved, the way you watch it, either of the characters existing on either show could be a hero or a villain. And it seems like every other week, allegiances are switching. And it's all a power base in it, really. All right, so to start out with the show, what we're looking at is it starts with the patriarch and matriarch of the family, Michael and Esther. So how this starts out is these two pretty much are responsible for the vampires existing within the fictional universe. How it works is these two are put together by an arranged marriage. Michael is a Viking. Esther is a former practicing witch. What happens from there is it's eventually revealed that Esther is barren. What she does specifically from that point is she makes a deal with her long-lost sister Dahlia to become non-barren. From there is She gets back into witchcraft, and this results in the birth of the first vampires, which we'll get to in a little bit. So how it works out specifically in the very beginning is Esther makes a deal with her sister Dahlia in order to become non-barren. Through this action, she gets re-involved in witchcraft, and she finds out that her children are greatly in danger of swarms of werewolves that seems to be running around their little Norwegian village. Specifically, what happens is the youngest son, Henrik, ends up dying. And so she gets doppelganger blood, which will exist how doppelgangers come into being later in the segment. He mixes the blood all in wine, and all the kids drink it, and it ends up making them immortal, but the side effect is vampirism. All right, a little bit of character analysis. So we start out with Michael, who, as mentioned, is the patriarch of the family. He's a Viking, and he's got a very high personality based on social Darwinism. Only the strongest survive. And that ends up shaping, more than anything else, how the family reacts, how they find themselves to be more dominant than anyone else on the planet, and how they perceive themselves as royalty. And then we also have Escher. I always mess up her name. Esther, who is the mother of Coulson children. She ends up having a number of children, first starting with Freya, Finn, Elijah, Niklaus, Rebecca, Cole, and then the deceased Henrik. All right, so the implementations of what we're looking at specifically with Escher's spell, like I mentioned prior, does involve doppelganger blood. They don't get into real specifics about it, but it seems to be like a very unique type of blood in this universe. So she uses blood magic, and it makes the children immortal. The primary side effect being they have to feed on blood in order to maintain immortality. That's the catalyst for this entire storyline, primarily. Is it gets so severe, though, that she's ashamed of what she's done, and so she makes her husband into a vampire. And his living purpose throughout the entire series is hunting down his kids and killing them. So, the direct fallout from this spell. It's based off very much what we're looking at from the threefold path in witchcraft. Whatever you do will come back to you threefold. What's interesting about this is, when you think about it, Esther kills her 6 children, and then it's returned by making them immortal. And it literally shows throughout history where there's death, resurrection as a vampire, death, resurrection as a vampire, so on and so forth. So the thing is, she becomes remorseful over this. Klaus, who is the middle child of this entire clan, upon his first kill begins an odd transformation. It reveals his true parentage at this point, which is that his father was actually a werewolf. In this mythology, there's a residing gene, and it only activates specifically as a result if you kill someone. So what happens is Klaus kills his first victim to feed on, and then he starts to transform, but because he's already a vampire, it's causing him direct pain. And so what happens at this point is Esther casts another spell to werewolf genes at bay. This will lead on to a whole other species down the road. And then, so what ends up happening throughout this is there's several different events down the timeline of Esther creating a plan to stop her children. The Strix are born, who the Strix are essentially one of the children's attempt to be like a more like classy version of genius thinkers over time to help out humanity, but they end up becoming like a secret society bent on stereotypical world domination. And this also leads to an endless conflict between witches, werewolves, and vampires over existing territory of the earth. So, and what's interesting is they all view it a different way. Like witches, they're bound to nature themselves. They want to live equally with earth. The werewolves view it as just a generalized home with territory stereotypical of how a wolf would look at it. And then the vampires just view it as a feeding ground. All right, the children of the Michaelsons we're looking at. So we start with Freya, the firstborn, Finn, Elijah, Klaus, Rebecca, Cole, and Henrik. All right, Freya. Freya is the oldest child. We don't really know about her until very much down the line. Reason being is because she disappeared. What we're looking at here is a very interesting tale. So when Esther made a deal with her sister Dahlia in order to get to no longer be barren, what happened was Dahlia made the deal stereotypical with the threefold path of, I want your firstborn child from that as payment. So she comes back years later and collects up Freya. And what ends up happening is actually pretty fascinating when you look at it with witchcraft, is Dahlia makes Freya into our power source. Like we've got some witches that would feed off of elemental energy, some that would just generally feed off the power of the earth, some off the stars, and so on and so forth. Freya is literally the battery for power. And it goes to the point where Freya becomes nearly immortal, and Dahlia essentially has to put her to sleep for 100 years. And then as that power is growing inside her, she wakes up, and she only ages like a year at a time, too. But it was interesting to see how it was kind of like a psychic vampire aspect that they brought onto the show, where literally an aunt is feeding off the energies of her living niece for power. So next we have Finn. Finn is almost always presented as the antagonist on the show. What's unique about him is he absolutely hates his bloodlust. He does not like the fact that he has to take life in order to live it. Of the entire existence of the show, which is over 1,000-year period, he has one person that he's ever turned into a vampire, and that was simply because he loved her. But beyond that, he ends up becoming a lot of times the primary antagonist, his mother, who on the course of the entire existence of, she's resurrected several times, and she'll bring him back too, just because of the fact that he's the most loyal. His main purpose is to get affection from his mom. All right, next we have Elijah. Elijah is said to be the most noble of all the characters on the show. And what's interesting about him was he's got a certain brain mindset, which we'll come to later on, is that he's very much loyal to his entire family. And he's a person that's bound by his words. So he makes a promise, like say 500 years ago, he's going to keep that promise that entire time period. He doesn't care that time has passed. Who will never break his word, and he's very loyal to Klaus. All right. As soon as it loads. Rebecca. Rebecca serves as the primary servant and companion as the series protagonist Klaus. And the one thing she wants out of this is a human life and family. So what's interesting is with this character more than any other is to break into the psychology of I would say, of barrenness more than anything else. Like, imagine someone who can just live a full life, but they can't experience a family along the way except for the family that's already been given to them, who also have a very longevity. They also play a lot with her down the road with a lot of the witch aspects of the show. Where there's a lot involving her with spirit transference, astral projection at some points, as well as what's interesting is I would look at it as a soul contract. There are times when she leaves her actual body and she inherits a whole other one. She looks at it as like, oh, this is great. I get to live out my existence. And then she's back in her existing body. So on and so forth. All right, so next up we have Cole. What they do with Cole is actually pretty interesting. Before he was a vampire, he was an expert in witchcraft. He's always someone who will employ witches, and he'll be literally teaching them the task. Because in this universe, what happens is, become a vampire, it's considered losing your spiritual connection to nature. So he's got all this mental knowledge within him, but he can't use it. He can't connect to nature like another witch could before he was undead. So they kind of put him directly in the series as a familiar type, doing a task, and he'll be like, yeah, you need to do this, you need to do this, so on and so forth, mix these chemicals, get that rabbit's foot, so on and so forth. And I didn't really go into it because there's not a lot of character on it, but the last child specifically in the entire series is Henrik, who all you see is that he dies by werewolves, and that's the whole catalyst for making the kids immortal. All right, so the primary attributes of vampires in this universe. First off, the originals cannot directly be killed by anything than a natural vampire would. And what I mean by that is like they're immune to sunlight, and there's really only a few things that can kill them. As far as the other vampires on the shows, like Stephen Salvatore and Damon Salvatore, the antagonist of the Vampire Diaries, they cannot enter sunlight unless protected by something, usually a gemstone or ring or necklace that's been blessed by a witch. No matter if they're an original vampire or when down the line, wolfsbane will immobilize them. And this adds to a lot of psychological analysis on the show because Klaus, who is the primary antagonist, is obsessed with people obeying him. And it gets to the point where he gets into a method where if one of his siblings upsets him, he'll cover a dagger in wolfsbane and he'll shove it into their heart, and it literally puts them in a coma. Keep them in a coffin until the point he feels like they've learned their lesson. Like literally decades will go by. And it's interesting how like it's just like one tiny compound is just something that can take down someone who's like been around for. Also with the vampires on this show, a werewolf bite will kill them. The individual dies with vampire blood in their system, they themselves will become vampires. Likewise, beyond that fact, vampire blood is a curing agent that a lot of people use within both shows. And then, classically, decapitation or removal of the heart causes death as well. All right, up next, we're going to talk about doppelgangers. So, we look at doppelgangers in the real world as either like a broken part of our spirit that we're looking upon, or a harbinger of doom, or a futuristic or past version of ourself that's giving us some sort of thing of knowledge. That's our mainstay on them. On the show, what we're looking at is a doppelganger is usually someone through your own lineage. Like, so say my physical body, as we're looking at right now, passes away. 300 years pass, and I have an ancestor that's like almost identical to me. That would be a doppelganger on this show. They don't really go into specifics of how the doppelganger line started, but it's something that is always constant throughout this show. So it starts with primarily a figure named Silas and Amara, and they're the two that you're seeing in both pictures on the screen right there. And they are the doppelgangers of the existing characters on the Vampire Diaries, Stefan and Amara. One is this physical vibrational magnetism that seems to pull doppelgangers together. And that's what we're looking at in a situation with Stefan again and Elena, who are their doppelgangers in the future throughout this show. Along with that, doppelganger blood seems to be a pretty potent thing throughout both shows. It ends up being a primary source of a lot of spells on here. Like, imagine like finding like, I don't know, like RH type blood, but it can be used for a lot more down the line, like some sort of research. Same general idea we're looking at here. All right, werewolves. They don't get into a generalized origin of werewolves on this show, but it's your generalized story. On a full moon, they're going to change into a wolf, as we're seeing right there. There are independent werewolves, but for the most part, they will operate in packs, and they will have like a social leader of some type, like a generalized king and queen. They have like full on listings of royalty that they would keep, just like we do in modern times with the Tudors, where it's here was this father, here was this father, so on and so forth, all the way down the line. And that ends up becoming pretty prominent on the plot lines with the father, or excuse me, with the mother of Klaus's child, Haley. Along with the werewolves, how they have them set up in this universe is, it's like I mentioned earlier, it's a residual gene. It just exists in there. It seems to be some sort of curse that was put on somebody down the line directly by witchcraft. And again, there's that threefold path. It's put on one person. It seems to spread all the way up through a whole generation of people. And the gene specifically in here is in cursed form. And like I said, if they end up killing someone, they're going to come back directly as a werewolf. Where they got directly interesting with werewolfism on the show, lycanthropy in general, as we would call it in the real world, is they introduced the concept of an evolved werewolf. So what the evolved werewolf is specifically is just a werewolf in human form. They go through endless loops and trails of the constant pain that it is to go into wolf form. And they even go at one point where they reverse the curse, where for a whole month you're a wolf and then you've got one day to be a human. What they did here on the show was with another mixture of witchcraft through severe good deeds. It was a reward where you would have all the effects and power of a werewolf, but in human form. And they called that the evolved werewolf. In general, both these shows gets extremely advanced, but I'm just going to give a generalized cover of it. First things first is they do full separation on these shows between psychics. Witches are more elemental based, more earth based, more natural remedies, more ritualistic, so on and so forth, while psychics are mental side of that only. There's not really many to situations where you're going to see someone who is a witch but also has psychic abilities, unless they're doing some sort of viewing spell in someone's eyes, or they can look into the past. But primarily, they do a very distinct job on purpose of keeping witches and psychics separate. Like I said, it is all ritualistic, unless they're doing just a generalized spell. It's almost always word operated, like it is in modern day witchcraft. They really don't even talk about like stuff like we talk about in the group, like laws of attraction or anything. It's all ritualistic. It's all word activation. Primarily, it's languages that they would use. Like occasionally, they will use voodoo language. They will use Latin. They will use Aramaic. But that's primarily it. From there on out, occasionally they'll use like English in the spells and incantations, but that's pretty much it. And it seems like a typical thing where like villain of the week, they do that with like a different spell of the week on these shows. It's like, oh, we need to get these things to make a spell. And they do a lot with sacred artifacts on both shows too. It's like, oh, we need to get this dagger. It's the only thing that can take this thing out, so on and so forth. All right. So next we're looking at hybrids. What's unique about the hybrids, first off, is there's aspects of every other creature on the show that needs to go into making this. So what happens specifically is how this whole line starts is what I mentioned earlier. Klaus was an illegitimate child, then he became a vampire. His werewolf gene, when he was a vampire, they subsided it. His whole life from this point on is about finding the proper doppelganger so he can become what he calls the hybrid, which the master hybrid. How that works specifically on the show is that doppelganger blood in his own system, and then there's a full-on incantation that has to happen from a witch, and then whichever werewolf he then bites from then on out will literally become a physical servant of him. He has a full-on connection with them, and they will do anything he says. On with the vampires in this show too, specifically, where all of the existing vampires have one of the originals as their original sire. And if one of the originals dies, that entire line goes out. What they literally did with the hybrids, instead of keeping them simple, well, vampire werewolf combined, is there's needed aspects of everything within them in order to become the highest breed. On the show specifically, Klaus is a hybrid, and then you'll notice to the left, that's Haley, who actually becomes a hybrid specifically because of the fact that she ends up carrying Klaus's child, which natural vampires on the show can't have kids, but Klaus, because of his mixed genes, actually ends up impregnating her, and the sound and the after effect of that actually makes her into a hybrid. And also, it should be mentioned what happens from the child from these two. She ends up becoming like the series' ultimate messiah. She's got vampire blood, she's got werewolf blood, and she's also got witch blood combined from another timeline that they sacredly do a coven by marrying or by burying Klaus's mother on the hallowed ground. So it was a nice little attribute that they did where they made like their own version of a Messiah, where it's like this one kid that has all these spiritual genes flowing into her. All right. So specific things that they reveal over time that kind of relate to the real world, kind of don't, kind of help the plot along, is vampires on the show can definitely heal, and it always sticks is emotional trauma. So imagine you're an immortal, you have something happen to you in like 100 AD. You're going to be still feeling the effects of that in the 1800s. And that gets revealed specifically through a conversation they have with Rebecca and Klaus, where she's like, all this stuff has happened to me and I can't fix it in my head. So it's actually was kind of like their way of covering PTSD and like other mental illnesses over the time. Because if you've actually seen either one of the show, like Klaus is definitely primarily part of the original for the originals was that it was on a certain sacred ground where they were made. And on that was a white oak. Effect of the entire ritual, one of the few things that can actually kill an original or first vampire is a white oak stake. Literally, it has to be from that tree, carved in a certain way, and it has to be, of course, forced into their heart a certain way. And a huge plot line that goes existing throughout both shows for a very long time is that there was one generalized bloodline of werewolves. It is revealed that there's 6. Because a natural commodity they always had on the show was Klaus's blood could always cure a werewolf bite because of his mixture. It's to the point where there's a guy that's trying to make a poison that's literally got all these genes from all these werewolf lines so that they actually have a way of fighting Klaus. And it was an interesting take, being like, you could be allergic to this one pathogen, so on and so forth, but hey, we've got 6 more. All right, so how they do the afterlife on this show, both shows, is actually pretty interesting. They have the other side. And the other side is just first presented to the viewer as what we would look at as the stage afterlife. However, what ends up being revealed to us over time is that the other side actually created by a witch. Prior to that, in this universe, there was no afterlife. There was no heaven. There was no hell. It's literally a place where if you're bad, you go there. And it's kind of like a twilight existence, and all you do is reflect on what you did in your life. And that's all it is. And it eventually, spoilers, gets destroyed. But what they do specifically is almost every character on both shows has died multiple times, so almost every character has been there. However, what they do with sorry, that was overly dramatic. The slide was supposed to switch quicker. So, how they have hell in the Vampire Diaries is through the creation of a psychic. There's a psychic on the show. His name is Arcadius. And he ends up being their version of the devil. So he's born in this fictional universe as the psychic. And he is viewed very much as a shamanistic healer. So if someone has some sort of brain trauma, if they've got emotional issues, they would come to him specifically. And with his psychic abilities, he can definitely read people's minds. And what ends up happening is he actually experiences an event where he sees a man who's lusting after a younger woman within his town. And very friendly, and he was like, if you want, I can help you remove those feelings you have. And the guy accuses him of invading his mind and then treats him as if he's evil. And he eventually convinces the rest of the villagers to feel the same way. And this is, keep in mind too, this is like the early 900s BC when this is all happening. And so they stake Arcadius up, also known as Cade, and they burn him at the stake. As we know, we can send out vibratory and frequency waves from us specifically. What we're looking at Arcadius is his are predominantly stronger in people on the earth at this point. He's the first psychic. So what happens is, as he's burning and dying, he shoots out a psychic blast, and the after effect of what happens specifically with this is it creates hell. And Arcadius, or Cade, becomes their incarnation of the devil. So we're not looking at the archangel Samael in this case. We're looking at a physical human being with psychic abilities who, through his own pain, created a whole other dimension. Comes his task afterward in disembodiment, specifically to torture wrongdoers. And we're talking about like every form of wrongdoing. Like, say somebody kills someone by accident, he wants to claim that soul. His whole purpose in this dimension is to punish those he deems wicked. And it all starts from his physical pain that he felt when he died. What they also do with this character that's pretty interesting is he's actually responsible for a lot of mythical creatures that do end up existing. The sirens, as we know from Greek mythology, are created by Arcadius because of their specific later on psychic powers. So he grabs like 2 individual girls. He notices they can sing in the minds of others, and he uses that. And this is a feature that they use where it grabs the subconscious, where they're singing within their mind, someone else's mind. They can review memories, they can remove memories, they can change someone's complete mindset throughout through psychic work. And so it was kind of interesting where, like, we're all used to this whole version of the hell dimension being a different kind of underworld, and there's always a definitive ruler. Here they literally just made their own version of it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation.
Yay! Awesome. Wow, you had to fit a lot of info into that. Like, it gets so complex.
Very good.
That wasn't even the surface of it either.
Man, we've been missing out. I've been missing out. I'm totally new to most of that, so cool. Well, thanks for enlightening us. You know, we like subjects like werewolves and vampires and doppelgangers and all of that stuff. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you guys have any questions about any of that you didn't understand?
I thought the whole afterlife thing was pretty cool, the way they handle that.
Yeah, that was interesting to me as well, that an angel would be doing that, but I guess that's close to the whole Lucifer situation as well.
Yeah. Well, no, it's like for years on the Vampire Diaries, they always talked about the other side. And that was all there was. And then they actually had a plot line eventually where the other side got destroyed. So there was nowhere for a soul to go except for back into the ether. And then they got it more complex. They're like, oh, sometimes witches make their own dimensions. Eventually revealed how hell existed. And that's actually in the recent season right now.
Interesting.
Yep. Let me go and turn off the live broadcast real quick.
Huh?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to turn off the live broadcast.
Clap.
Thank you.